So, in fact, the original title was What the Consumer Wants. And I see my assistant has turned it around to What Does the Consumer Want? But it's probably more apt because we're all consumers and we probably all want different things. No one of us is the same as another. But first of all, why am I coming to talk to you about what the consumer wants? As Lorraine pointed out, I have been working in the food industry for a long time. And that has allowed me to talk to all the different food companies who are part of my organization. So the food and drink industry in Europe is Europe's largest manufacturing industry. We have a turnover of more than 1 trillion, so I think it's something we can be proud of. I know it's also Ireland's largest food manufacturing industry. We have a very important trade. We export, we're the biggest exporter onto the world market and the biggest importer from the world market. So all of this, of course, is very important. Big employer, and importantly, the food industry is made up on a large majority from SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises, and these are the ones that really have the highest employment in the industry. So in my organization, which is based in Brussels, I have 25 national federation members. These are federations like FDII here in Ireland, the Food and Drink Industry Ireland, but I also have the French and the Spanish and the Italian and the Swedish and the Norwegian and. I have as members European sector organizations. So in Brussels you have all the sectors come together, like the European dairy sector or the EDA or the European meat sector or the European spirits sector. So they all have offices in Brussels and they're all also part of my organization. And finally, I have 19 large companies. These companies, unfortunately no Irish company. It would be really nice to have an Irish company, but I have companies like Nestle, it's the biggest in the world. I have Cargill, I have Unilever, I have Danone, I have Coca-Cola, I have General Mills, I have Kellogg's. So all of these big companies are part of my organization. So I think that makes me slightly eligible to talk to you about what the consumer wants, because that's what I hear a lot of in the corridors at work. So hence the title, What Does the Consumer Want? The consumer wants lots of things, and in fact consumers are changing. About 20 years ago it was a lot easier to work in the food manufacturing industry, but today consumers want, I think above all, affordability. So a lot of surveys have been done, what actually spurs the consumer to buy one thing instead of another thing, and the results vary, but every single one of the studies have shown that in fact price is the most important purchasing decider. So when somebody is out there buying food, usually price is the first thing that comes to mind. It even comes before taste or perceived quality. You can see that household expenditure on food has actually been slowly dropping. It rose a little bit during the tough times, and now it's on its way down again, and it represents around 12% of household spend. What does the consumer want? It wants safe food, of course, and thank God it does. And in fact, the food on the market is by definition safe. If it's not safe, it's illegal. So food is safe. I think it's something that's taken for granted by consumers, and rightly so. In fact, it's paramount for the industry. We cannot put an unsafe food out there. Obviously, it'll bounce right back on us and do enormous damage to brand, etc. According to the European Commission, European food has the highest safety levels in the world, and I think I agree with that. So consumers want safe food. Increasingly, consumers want food that's good for you. There's a health trend, which I think is a very important and very useful thing that's happening today. You see trends in gluten-free, trends in lactose-free. These trends are not always based on something that on a real allergenicity. However, they're trends. But These diets, there are diets that are trending. Of course, we all know about vegetarianism and veganism. Now there's paleo diets. There's a broad range of new diets which are starting up. Some of them are fads, they're not trends, they're just a fad, and these things come and go. But because of overweight and obesity, I think the increasing awareness that we see of eating healthy, it's very important, and it's very good. But of course, food is only part of this. And lifestyles are really, really important. So even if you are very careful about what you eat, you still have to have an active life. You have to have a lifestyle that is not one that will make you load on the calories. So health trends are very important. Traditional foods is something that people are looking for more and more. Here you see increasing farmers markets or artisanal foods. A lot of these traditional products are considered as unprocessed foods, which is not necessarily the case when you think of all the traditional beers or traditional cheeses or traditional breads. These are all processed foods. So sometimes traditional foods are considered healthy foods, which are considered unprocessed foods. There's a lot of falsity in there. But traditional foods are part of people's identity. You see a growing number of geographical indications which will link a food product to a certain area. And this is all very important. It's part of pride. It's part of national pride. And so we see an increasing market for traditional food. People want choice. And choice they can find in the variety of products that we produce as an industry, but also in different portion sizes, for example. So instead of just getting a product such as this, you'll get it in a bigger 5 litre, or you'll get a smaller bottle. You get these 1 serving sizes, so you get more and more choice in the sizes. You also get more and more choices in nutritional composition. You'll get the same product but with added vitamins or minerals, etc. So choice is something that consumers want and which the food industry has to provide today. Another trend we see is organic, although I've seen some of the more recent figures for organic, and it looks like it's leveling off, but we'll see if it does indeed continue to grow. It still is quite niche. It represents, in Europe, approximately 3% of the total in the European Union. But it has doubled, as you can see from the chart. It has doubled over the last 10 years, so it's also an important trend. People want fair trade. So what is fair trade? It's fair trade is a respect of social and ethical values, fair wages, no child labour, fair working conditions, etc. So now, and we see there's a trend where more and more people are looking for, are asking questions: where does my food come from? How was it produced? Has it been produced ethically? So that's the fair trade trend that's starting up. And even this goes into animals as well. So people are, some consumers are looking at animal welfare. Have the animals been treated kindly? Just as an anecdote, there was an EU directive which came into force in January 2012, and it laid down conditions for raising hens, so the size of the coops and other living conditions for hens. And in France, the number of hens that were raised was cut by half, which had a huge impact on egg production. And in fact, in France, it was about 21 million eggs per week were no longer on the market. So the food industry had to import eggs or even egg powder from elsewhere. So it makes you wonder, if you're importing eggs or egg powder from the rest of the world, in what conditions were the hens who laid those eggs reared? So we have to have a very open mind, a very balanced approach to all of these things. But anyway, animal welfare, increasingly important here in Europe. What we need actually as an industry, I think, is a level playing field, using European rules as a base, but where everybody else applies the same rules. And we're a long, long way away from that. Then we have more and more the green aspect of food and food production. Has my food been produced sustainably? Has there been damage to the rainforests? what pesticides have been used, what is its water footprint or its greenhouse gas footprint, what is its carbon footprint. So all of these questions are increasingly important for another sector of citizens. Again, here we need to make sure that the rest of the world follows the European approach to all of these questions, which is really to make sure that more and more production in the food industry is done sustainably. Food miles, where does my food come from? How far is it travelled? We should be eating more local products, etc., etc. Another trend that we see today, buy local movements, things are more environmentally friendly, we should support local producers. Here again, I think we have to look beyond these questions and look at perhaps some farm in Africa where they're growing green beans and see if we stop importing those green beans, what happens in the country which is now exporting them to us, and what happens to the communities there who no longer have a market for their green beans. It's just to widen the way we look at all of these questions, which are very important, of course. To be informed, I think that's of course what consumers want, and it is a right. Consumers have the right to be informed. They want to know more and more about what's in their foods and how the foods were produced. They're more and more interested in these sort of questions. This being said, we can put a huge amount of information on food products, and we put more and more information on the product. But you all know that too much information can actually kill information, so there can be an information overload. And what's more, on average, a buyer spends 10 seconds looking at a label. So you'd wonder how much information they're actually absorbing in that 10 seconds. And I go back to one of the first slides. Actually, affordability is probably the most important thing, which guides what consumers actually choose at the end of the day. I'm talking about the average consumer. So they want the information, but they don't necessarily use it. We saw some rules on labeling coming out recently, last year, and these rules are actually quite hard to adhere by, because you have we had a whole discussion around font size and what font to use and where the information should be. There was a discussion around what we call these things. They're now called reference intakes. At the time we were calling them guideline daily amounts. This was quite an innovative approach that we started in FoodDrinkEurope in Brussels, and I think we now see the guidelines or the reference intakes being used throughout the world. So that's had huge uptake. I think we're giving the information to the consumers, but again, in my view, there might be smarter ways for informing consumers than putting it all on the pack. Convenience, of course, very important today, and increasingly important because more and more couples, you see both partners out working. So I know it myself, you don't necessarily have the time or the willpower when you come in from work to roll up the sleeves and start chopping and cutting and cooking, and so some sort of convenience foods are very handy at times. Processed foods are not of less quality. In fact, when you cut your tomatoes and your onions and your garlic and you make a tomato soup yourself, the stock cube, of course, is processed food, but if you were to do it from scratch, you're processing your own food. And so processed foods is not equal to less quality foods. It also helps to reduce waste because there's a lot less throwaway when you use processed products. Processing also increases the shelf life. We can add nutrients and increase the nutrient quality of processed food. So I think that in the convenience area, when you think of the increase of convenience foods and processed foods being used by today's consumer, it really is nothing that we have to worry about. I think it's actually a very, very useful trend, which like what I call the 2-in-1, 3-in-1, it's when you buy a product not because you're hungry and it's going to fill you up, but also because it's enriched in calcium and it gives you extra energy. Or you think of sports players who use energy drinks, or I've taken the bifidus active yogurts there, which help intestinal transit, or omega-3 enriched something. So the 2-in-1, 3-in-1, there's an increasing demand for these sorts of products as well. So all of this, that was just a tip of the iceberg. There are more, and probably you're all consumers, so you probably have other things that you would look for when you go shopping. But I just took the trends we find out there, which are the most frequent. So how do we respond as an industry to all of that? And I'm going to go through this very quickly because I don't want to take up too much time. We have many approaches to all of these questions, because in fact all of these challenges and all of these desires of consumers actually raise challenges for the industry, but in every challenge you have opportunities. So we have started, for example, our ETP Food for Life. ETP is the European Technology Platform Food for Life. Here it's a platform which unites industry, but also academia. The scientists are there, lots of other stakeholders are there. We have consumer groups, we have NGOs, environmental NGOs, etc. So all of these people come together and discuss research and development and innovation in the food industry. So the idea behind our Food for Life technology platform is actually to bring some of the innovation that's happening in the labs, to bring it to the market. Because innovation is great, but if it's to stay on the laboratory bench, there's not much point. So what we're really trying to do here is work along with the scientists to bring the products to the market. So the industry is there. I think here in UCD you also have that approach. You have industry people on campus, so they can talk to the and talk to the students, see what's happening, and help the students bring their products, their innovative products, to the market. So we channel the knowledge that's gleaned inside the technology platform we channel it through to the markets to meet the practical needs of all the consumers. There are a couple of examples. There's Trafoon, Facet, and New Age. Trafoon it's all about traditional foods. So traditional foods do not necessarily have to be non-innovative. You can also innovate in tradition. And this is all about innovation in traditional foods. Facet is all about food contact materials, flavorings, additives. Somebody here in the audience has been very involved, so she could tell you more about that than I can. And food for the elderly is the New Age project. This is a fairly new one that started up. We have an increasingly populated elderly population, which is great. But what we try to do in the food industry is not add years to life, because that's already happening, but add life to years. So make those years that people are living longer, make them healthier, more active and happier years. So we're developing foods for that sector, but we're also, of course, developing foods for different other groups, like athletes or very small children, etc. DPAH, what is the DPAH? It's the Diet, Physical Activity and Health Platform. This was developed by the EU Commission. Again, it's more and more we work with platforms. We have all the different stakeholders involved. And here, this platform was set up in 2005 by the European Commission. Excuse me. And the food industry plays a very, very active role. You don't just sit around the table and talk. You have to commit to doing something if you want to be part of this. So we committed, every year we make different commitments, and in fact, of the total commitments that have happened on the DPAH since it started up, the food industry has made 50%. So we're the most active player there. What are the commitments? It's things like we commit to reformulate. We commit to improve our advertising habits. We commit to giving consumers more information. We commit to promoting healthy lifestyles. How do we do that? Let me give you some examples. In reformulation, we have committed to reformulate out salt, for example, not out completely, but to reduce the salt in food products, because we know that salt is not necessarily, too much salt is not good for the heart, it's not good for your health. Over the first 10 years of the platform, the industry has reformulated out more than 15,000 tons of salt from its products. It's a lot, because when you think, just to take an example, Kellogg's, they have reformulated out almost 50% of the salt in their breakfast cereals. That doesn't happen overnight, because kids will not want to eat their cornflakes if they taste different. So it has to be very gradual. So everybody has to do it together as well, because you take another cereal maker like Nestle, there'll be a switch if Kellogg's doesn't taste as good as it did yesterday, if it happens overnight. So they have to hold hands as breakfast cereal makers and do this together. So the platform serves this purpose, bringing people together, doing things very gradually. At the same time, of course, you have to do a hell of a lot of research, because you have to substitute the salt with something else that'll keep the cornflake crisp in this example, because salt is not only for taste and it's for preservation, but it has other properties such as keeping that cornflake nice and crisp when you pour milk on it. And if you take all the salt out, it just goes floppy. So yeah, I'm sure that's not what the kids want in the morning. At least my bunch wouldn't have. They'd have turned their noses up at that. Anyway, so that's salt, sugar, thousands of tons of sugar have been reduced from processed products. Trans fats have been practically eliminated. In the snacks market, 1/3 of the products that you buy on the snacks market have reduced salt, and 2/3 of the products have reduced saturated fats. So there's a lot of work. This is ongoing. And I have, hang on, there's we just did a brochure on all the work that has been done here, and this is it. So balanced diets and healthy lifestyles. You can see that on our website. You get loads and loads of examples there. I've mentioned a couple of companies, but everybody's involved in reformulating foods to make them healthier. So that's one thing I want to show. This is another one. So that's the DPAH. The advertising responsibly, companies have done a lot to. We have a pledge on advertising, especially where young children are concerned. So they're trying to advertise more responsibly, not advertise to children under a certain age, avoid certain hours where children are in front of the television sets when they're advertising certain products, not only on television but also magazines, also on their own websites, etc., etc. And consumer information, that's where our reference intakes came from. That was a project that the companies in my organisation started 10 years ago, and which you find practically throughout the world. Where else? What are we doing? What we have in the environmental chapter is our SCP Roundtable. The SCP is Sustainable Consumption and Production Roundtable. In fact, this was started up in 2009 because we were faced with a bit of a dilemma where the retailers were putting pressure on the industry to put carbon footprints on their products. So you have big retail saying, we won't buy your products, dear food company, unless you put a carbon footprint on it. So we said, well, hang on a minute, let's sit down and talk about this, because we're not quite sure how to label the carbon, how do you measure it, and how do we put it on the package, or like, can we sit and talk? And the retail said, no, just do it. Well, we had a difficult discussion at the time. So we, in the food industry, started our SCP Roundtable. It is the Sustainable Consumption Production Roundtable. It starts way upstream at the farm, all the way down to packaging, recovery of packaging, recycling of packaging. So there are tens of different organizations sitting around the table, including the WWF, for example. UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, is there as well. And it grew so fast and so big that we outsourced it, and it's become a living entity on its own. You can actually look it up on the web as well. What we decided to do, there were sort of 3 different tracks that we worked on from a whole food supply chain point of view, from a whole lifestyle of the different products point of view. As I say, we actually go down to the far end and recover and reuse and recycle as well. The 3 tracks we were looking at, the first one was, what are we measuring and how do we measure it? How do you measure carbon footprint? Why only carbon? What about water? What about other gases? What about biodiversity? What about soil? What about, why just carbon? So at this stage we turned to the JRC, the Joint Research Centre of the Commission, and they joined up. And they've done all the science and the analysis here, which is really great. They've done it from a sector point of view, so they have one approach for the meat industry, one approach for the fruit and veg industry, one approach for the dairy industry, etc. So that was the first thing. Why just carbon, and how are we measuring it? So we've worked on that. Then the second stream was, how do we communicate about it? Now that we know in this biscuit what the footprint is, environmental footprint is, how do we communicate? Do we want to put more stuff on the label? Is there not a smarter way of doing this? And then finally, in the third stream was, okay, now that we're all sitting around the table, what can we do about it? So let's work together. And people are working more and more together. Currently we have pilot projects up and running, along with the Commission, funded by the European Commission, with various members of the food industry. And it's really a whole chain approach, and we're seeing how far we can go to cut down the environmental footprint in food production. So it's doing really, really well. And that's our SCP Roundtable. We have already drawn up tools for assessing environmental impact, tools for analysis of environmental impact, and a good practices manual on how to communicate and how to improve the footprint. So that's our environmental things. And here we have climate action and the food and drink industry. Time to act, you'll find that. It's a recent publication as well for the COP21 discussions coming up in Paris in the near future. That's also on our website. We've also looked very, very closely at food waste. You probably know that food waste is a big problem today, in spite of the fact that we're talking about how are we going to feed these 9 billion people on the planet. We're still wasting a hell of a lot of food, about 30%. But in fact, the food industry doesn't waste all that much. We're quite mean about the products we produce, and things that we don't actually use in food, we will redirect back to feed, animal feed. Most of the waste, in fact, in the developed world happens in your kitchens and my kitchen and in our fridges, and from retail to the kitchen. That's where it happens. In the less developed world, it happens on the farm. There's a lot of waste on farm, or a lot of waste in storage of agricultural raw materials. You probably know all of this better than I do. So what we did was we decided to work again with all the different actors throughout the chain, and try and look at the life cycle of a product and see how we can actually cut down on food waste. We pinpointed the hotspots where most of the waste was occurring, and this is Europe, and tried to target those and see how we can tidy it up and how we can reduce the waste. We again are working on things like how to inform the consumer better. How about dates, use by or consume by or best before, all these sort of dates. We're trying to work through with the legislator how to make this smarter, because there's a lot of confusion there in the consumers' minds about what all these dates mean. And sometimes you see best before the 30th of September and people are throwing it out on the 31st because it's gone beyond the date. 31st of September, that would be difficult, on the 1st of October. And of course, best before, it's a quality thing, and you can actually consume the product a couple of days later. It's not that it's not unsafe. A consume by, that's a different story. So I think we have to do a better job as the industry to communicate with people and to explain all of this and to find smarter ways of doing it. People are talking about smart fridges and all that sort of thing now, but that's a completely different field. I don't know very much about it, but certainly there are different approaches that we can use. A social dialogue, we are working very closely with our partners, our social partners. These are the unions. So we have a partner in IFAT, which is the European Food, Forestry, Agriculture and Tourism Trades Union. These are social partners. We work with IFAT very closely on doing a lot of stuff together. We're looking at how to maintain our aging workforce, how to keep people at work, how to make them mentor the younger people. There's a huge unemployment problem in Europe at the moment, especially in the southern parts of Europe. How can we increase the job possibilities for those young people? How can we hire them? Maybe we need to open up more traineeship possibilities. One of my members has pledged to take on between 50 and 60,000 young people in Europe this year. That's huge. but some of the big guys are really making an effort. So we're working very hard at trying to create more jobs, more growth. This is the whole European Commission plan at the moment, jobs and growth, creating more jobs and jobs for training those young people, because we can't just hire any young person. We need to try to hire a certain sort of young person. So we need people doing what you're doing, going to universities, looking at food as a potential and possible future employment, and taking those youngsters and making sure that they're studying the right things, doing the right things, giving them a traineeship, and then hiring them. So that's what's happening with AFAT from a social point of view. I think I'm just coming to the end. Corporate responsibility, or CSR, corporate social responsibility, and responsible business conduct. These, I think, we used to talk about this as something novel. We don't anymore. This is really something that has become an integral part of strategies of different companies, because it makes sense. It's good for brands. When you do things properly and you are respected for it, you grow your reputation as a company, and it's good news for your brand. So people will look for your brand instead of other brands. It creates this preference. It builds a business with your suppliers and with your consumers. And it drives innovation, because you're always looking for smarter, cleaner, better ways of doing things, which also makes economic sense. It generates cost savings. So generally speaking, responsible business conduct makes a lot of sense for business. It's good for citizens. It's also good for the environment. It's good for future generations. It's a win-win-win-win-win. So and the companies here as well, you'll get something on our website. You can see a huge amount of effort being put in by companies worldwide when they sourcing raw materials, for example, and sourcing it more sustainably, and ensuring that the workers have good working conditions, that there's no child labour, etc. So there's a sub-site on our website which goes into a lot of detail, a lot of examples on what the companies are doing in the world. Most of our raw materials in Europe we source from Europe, but there are some raw materials that we need in the food industry in Europe that we cannot source in Europe, such as coffee or cocoa. But if you look at the work that Nestle, that Mars, all these people are doing, where they source their raw materials, it's really, really impressive. And I'd encourage you to do that. Trade really is a thing. It's a safety thing. I said we were the biggest exporter, the biggest importer of raw materials, agricultural raw materials and processed products worldwide. But here, safety is paramount. I've said it before. It's really important to look very closely at what we're importing, because more and more with global trade, we're importing from the four corners of the world, and we can run into problems here. We work very closely with the customs people throughout the European Union in all the member states, along with the European Commission. When I say we, I mean my organisation. So if some customs chap in Rotterdam or in Thessaloniki or in Hull comes across something like, God forbid, melanin in milk powder, he will raise the alarm. The alarm will go straight to the European Commission. The Commission will contact us. We will then contact all of our members, collect all the information, anonymize it, because otherwise the damage could be really, really hurtful for the brand of whoever's imported it. They haven't even used it in their foods, but they could already have suffer some damage if their name was associated with it. So we anonymize everything. We find out, for example, where the goods are coming from, how much is coming in, are there other batches, where is it going, is it going to be incorporated in another food, what food, where is it destined? So we try and build a fort around this product that's come in, that's been infected or contaminated by something, and that way we actually keep the market safe from this product. We withdraw it, and we also protect the companies who otherwise, if they did use this product and put it on the supermarket shelves, there would have to be a withdrawal from the shelves, and that would be really, really bad news for the company. So safety is very, very important, and all imported foods must, I'm sure you know, adhere to the same safety standards as the European foods. So, and they're quite high. Finally, food is very personal. And diets are very, very individual. So what I want and what I like to eat, and what you want and what you like to eat, and what I need and what you need, of course, are two entirely different things. So it's very logical that we move towards more targeted and personalized foods. I'm not going to go there because I know I've looked at just earlier on, I looked at the speakers that you've lined up someone in March who's going to talk about personalized food. But it's something that's really exciting. I don't know how many of you track what you're eating or what you're doing and what you're I have one of these things, Fitbit. I'm sure you all have. You all know about Fitbits. So it's a fun thing. Okay, I'm with one of my daughters. We sort of have a competition with each other to see how many steps she's done and how much exercise I've done, etc. I'm not terribly good. I don't put in the calories I've eaten, but I see the calories I've consumed. It's fun. But more and more, I think we're going towards bringing these things together. Even shopping online, things are really changing. And this, of course, is very challenging for the food industry, but there are also huge opportunities there. So, as I say, personalized food, insects. It's another challenge we're going to face. Or seaweeds. Yeah, insects. I see someone's nose going up. I don't like the thought of it either. But as a protein source, if we're running out of protein, maybe we could just feed the animals with the insects and eat the steak instead, which is what I prefer. But seaweeds, which is one of my favorite topics, that could be another source of protein. So, but then all of this will be novel, and to introduce a novel food onto the European market is quite a challenge in itself, because European legislation tends to be quite burdensome and rather long. So all of these are very interesting challenges. As I say, I won't go there, I'll stop, because you have somebody else lined up for that in March, who's undoubtedly more expert than I am. So I'll stop there. I've probably bored you a little bit, but you're welcome to ask any questions. If I can, I'll answer them. And please do look at our website. So our website should be here. Yeah, FoodDrinkEurope.eu. And you'll get a lot of this information. You've got lots of examples as well on our website. So do have a look. Thank you.